Welcome to all of our members, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy that you're here with us. So our topic for our CJ Salon is the representation of masculinity in voice TV. And we want to give a big shout out and a warm thank you to our partners, Promundo and the Kering Foundation, for all of their support and for funding this groundbreaking study and this event today. I also want to introduce to you Andrea Lust, who is our sign language interpreter, and we're thrilled that she's with us today. So we have a really robust agenda, so I'm just going to walk you through it really quickly. In a moment, you are going to hear some opening remarks from Geena Davis and from Salma Hayek-Pinot. You are then going to hear a research presentation from Gary Barker with Promundo and Dr. Caroline Heldman with the Institute. After that, I have the pleasure of moderating a panel discussion with three of our leading male advocates, Justin Baldoni, Wade Davis, and Joshua Rush. We're going to bring back Gary Barker with Promundo, along with Celine Bonaire with the Kering Foundation for some closing remarks, and then Q&A. So are you ready? So without further ado, I would love to welcome first up, Geena Davis, Academy Award winning actor, founder and chair of the Geena Davis Institute, and Salma Hayek-Pinot, Academy Award nominated actor, producer, and Kering Board of Director. Take it away.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's very exciting to have so many of you with us. Although you have always heard me talk a lot about the importance of equitable representation of women and girls on screen, the critical social issue around toxic masculinity is what a real man, what a real man is of great importance also, and particularly to me as the proud mother of two boys in addition to my daughter. Media images make an important imprint on all of our children from when they're very, very young, when they first start consuming media. And media representations of masculinity, much like messaging coming from friends and family, can have real world impact on the well-being and behavior of our boys and men. Because of my role as an actor and advocate, I already had a heightened awareness of on-screen portrayals before I had my children. But when they were little and when they were toddlers, I noticed immediately from the first things that I started showing them that there were negative stereotypes in the programming that was aimed at our youngest kids. And not only did I notice that girls were not being represented fairly, I also saw that boys were not being shown as much as caring or as able to express a full range of emotions. And my approach was always not to limit and censor what they were watching, but that I would become their media literacy educator and started running dialogue with them about what they were watching them to help train them to recognize the negative stereotypes. So much so that as they become older, when I watch with them, if I even just begin to start to lean over to say something, they say, "I know, Mom, I know that was a negative stereotype." So we know that children, little children especially, learn their value to society by seeing themselves reflected in the culture. Oh, there's somebody like me, so that must mean that I matter. And we want our boys, as much as girls, who currently have been consuming media at a rate in record-breaking numbers, regardless of their race or sexual orientation or ability, to see themselves reflected, to be inspired to dream big about their own lives and about their potential. So our goal is simple: make it normal for our youngest children to see everywhere a wide range of inclusive and complex characters, so that girls and boys will grow up to empathize with and care more about each other's stories. And let's create stories for boys that have the power to challenge the very narrow masculine norms in ways that show them as having a full range of emotions and not focusing on anger or violence or self-injurious behaviors. And this will help shape their lifelong health and happiness. And as I always say, media, on-screen media, is one of the only sectors of society that can make systemic change absolutely overnight. So for all of those of you who are with us today, when you're creating your next show or any type of messaging or content, take another pass. Challenge the stereotypes and tropes of how you may be describing your characters and their activities and how they treat one another. Boys can be nurses and girls can be race car drivers. I'm so very proud of our partnership with Promundo and so grateful to the Kering Foundation for their support and for funding this very important work. And now it is my very great pleasure to introduce my friend and longtime ally, Salma Hayek Pinot, Academy Award nominated actor, producer, and the Kering Foundation board director.
Thank you so much, Geena. Well, the Kering Foundation started about 12 years ago. And our main focus was to combat violence against women and empower women in many places in the world. I have to say, I have to give credit to my husband because I had been an activist for women's rights for like more than 25 years. But it was not my idea. It came from him. He was more informed about our struggles, which, by the way, you have to remember at that time, it was not cool to talk about it. It was not cool to talk about it. That's why it's one of the many reasons I respect you so much, Geena. But then when he became more aware, it was his idea to create this foundation. And we've done a lot of amazing work that I'm really proud of, and that it's been really it's been a passion for me. But about 2 years ago, when finally all these talks we had about women started taking action and started becoming like infectious everywhere, and everybody started talking about women, and I got to live the changes, which I'm so excited that in my lifetime, I actually got to be part and experience the change in our perception. Then we started thinking about the confusion that this was creating in men. And confusion is a beautiful opportunity, because when you're not set in your ways, and when there is this gray space, when you're trying to figure things out, it is a fantastic door for change, for re-education, and for reinventing ourselves. For me, I've been a feminist for a long time, but it's the only reason is because girls, we've had it really bad historically. If men had been in the situations that we as women have been historically, I probably would be fighting for men instead of for women. However, this is a great opportunity to do it together. So when we made this decision, we started looking for organizations that were focusing on men and these questions and the redefinition or understanding of masculinity today. And we were shocked to see that there was almost nothing. Not even just for today. I mean, it was really, really hard to find any organizations. And we were very, very lucky to find Promundo, which is one of the few in the world, but it's definitely the one that is that embraces our principles the most, and that it's, thanks to Gary, set up in more countries in the world, because he's done an amazing job, and you'll get to meet him very soon. And then once we did this, contacting, we realized that there was no information, very little research, almost no data. They were working, of course, they were one of the few, but there was really a need for data. And in this moment is when, of course, we went to the Geena Davis Institute, because they are the best and because I trust her. And I don't say that very often. And like I say, I deeply, deeply admire her. And it was such a great opportunity to work again together. And they've done a fabulous job. Now, you're about to hear a lot about what they found. But I do want to make a point on this. It was very interesting for me to see this research, because already we see that women are in a much better position in the last 2 years. I mean, it's incredible the advance we've done from 10 years ago, from 5 years ago. And this is great. And I want you to pay attention to the fact also that, of course, the entertainment industry, part of our duty is to mimic society. So, of course, there are some data of the representation of the sexes on television that is realistic of what happens in our society. But what we're hoping, I think, is that we strive not just to mimic society, but to use the entertainment industry to inspire the watchers to create a better society. And one thing that is important to keep in mind is I'm Mexican and I'm a woman, and I'm Arab. I have Lebanese, Spanish, Mexican, I have a little bit of everything. And I have to tell you that when you are continuously told, this is who you are, this is what is your type, this is who you are, even just being a curvy woman, that's a whole other stereotype. When you keep hearing this over and over, when you're little, you go, no, but I'm not like that, and eventually, we become it. We become it. That's all we hear, that's who we are. So, like I said before, we hope that all this information inspires you to create a utopia, or not just who we are, but who do we want to be? Who do we want to be? This is a very special moment. It's a sublime moment for change and for redefinition of who can we become as a species, as a human species. And for this, it is incredibly important that this time in history, we do it together. We do it hand in hand. Not against, I have this, you have that, but it is so exciting to have this possibility of dialogue and experimentation to rediscover not just who we've been or who we are today, but who do we want to be. I hope you find it useful.
Thank you so much, Geena. Thank you so much, Salma, for those really deep and moving words. And we're going to jump right in, and I am going to welcome Gary Barker, the CEO of Promundo, a longtime friend. I've had the privilege of being on the board of directors for Promundo, and also Dr. Caroline Heldman. I call her the goddess of research and insights for the Institute, who will present If He Can See It, Will He Be It? Take it away.
Thanks, Madeline. Before we jump into the research, I just want to also offer my thanks to the Geena Davis Institute and to the Kering Foundation for this collaboration. And I need to say as well that we are here doing this work. We are asking about manhood and masculinity is because of the brave work that so many women in this world have done for years to say, we demand equality. And that list of women who have led that would be very long, but it needs to include Tarana Burke, and it certainly needs to include Selma and Geena and many thousands of unsung women who have been doing this work globally and locally for so many years. That's why we're here. And then I need to take a 30-second fanboy moment to say that we at Promundo have long admired Geena and Selma for looking Hollywood in the eye and not blinking and say, we demand equality. And so it's that brings us to the table to say that equality means we must think about how we engage men and boys. Promundo's work has been founded on the relatively simple belief that gender equality needs men and men need gender equality. And also on the belief that if we can understand where men and boys are on this, we can move ahead. And so together with Caroline and with the Geena Davis Institute, we believe in making data great again. And we're going to use this data to talk about how do we engage our sons, how do we engage Hollywood, how do we engage parents to move ahead on this. So I'm going to start it off, and then Caroline will take us into the media study. Just about 3 years ago, as lots of noise was ramping up around Me Too, we did a 3-country study that went to 2 countries after that, the US, the UK, and Mexico, on where young men are on gender equality. What do they think it means to be a man in a moment in the world when so much attention necessarily has been focused on how do we bring and center the voices of women and girls? Where are men on this? So we did surveys in those 3 countries, and then follow up afterwards. Partners carried it out in Australia and Jamaica. And we asked, where are men on these ideas about manhood? We called it the Man Box Study, after Paul Kivel's expression of how men are boxed into these ideas. Not surprisingly, 7 pillars that came out there: self-sufficiency, acting tough, physical attractiveness, although you can't show that you put any effort into looking physically attractive, rigid masculine norms, who does what at home, although a lot of advancing on sexual diversity. Lots of young men, heterosexual young men, still think they don't want to be associated with, don't want to be confused for being gay. Hypersexuality is still there, aggression and control. Across those 7 issues, about 1/3 to 1/2 of young men believed in them. They're in the box still. And we asked the question, so what does that mean? Why is that important? Next slide, please. That is important because the more young men were in the box, apart from education level, urban, ethnicity, whatever, the more men are in the box, the more they believe in those norms. You can see the numbers here. The more likely they are to harass sexually. 6 times as likely in the UK and the US, 3 times as likely in Mexico, if you believe in these ideas about manhood. Next one, please. Not only that, but you're also more likely to binge drink, to bully, whether online or physically, to be in a traffic accident, to be depressed, to think about suicide, to use violence against a female partner. The man box matters. These norms are not just jokes that are told at bars and locker rooms. They shape lives, they shape how men act. So much so, we were so struck by those associations, fairly obvious at some level, but so struck by them that we also asked a health economist to work with us to say, how do these also affect, what are the outcomes we can measure? We could measure, because we know how much health costs and lost life we can attribute to those things I just listed. Just among young men ages 18 to 30 every year in the US economy spends about $16 billion that we can attribute to these harmful ideas of manhood, just on those 6 outcomes that I mentioned before. This was a study we did together with Unilever and Axe. And that study led us to say, so who makes these ideas about manhood? Where do we look upstream? That led us to Geena Davis Institute. So Caroline, over to you to share with us on what boys are seeing in television.
Thank you, Gary. And as Gary pointed out, we're really interested in understanding how boys and men learn about the man box. And there are lots of societal institutions and agents that teach boys and men about this, right? So family, peers, educational institutions, religious institutions. But one of the most powerful shapers of society and culture is media. And so we dug into what boys ages 7 to 13 are seeing. And in the top rated shows, we looked at over 3,000 characters, and they appeared in about 500 episodes. The first thing that we found is actually there's pretty good representation when it comes to leads who are women and leads who are people of color, but 0 leads had disabilities and 0 leads were shown as LGBTQ, which means that boys are only being exposed to certain stories, which sends the message that only certain lives matter. We also found that the boys' media that they're exposed to the most is reinforcing the man box in several ways. The first is that it reinforces very rigid gender roles that tell boys and men that their primary value is derived from paid labor, not labor in the home. So we found that boys, male characters are more likely to be shown having a job, and fathers are far less likely to be shown as being hands-on or competent parents. We also found that boys' media reinforces other aspects of the man box. The idea that boys and men need to be self-sufficient and engage in high-risk behaviors in order to prove their manhood. So boys, for example, are more likely to be shown without parents than girl characters. Girls are shown as having a close relationship with their mothers. Boys are not shown as having a close relationship to any great extent with mothers or fathers. And unsurprisingly, boys and men are shown as engaging in high-risk behaviors at a higher rate than girls and women. So this includes smoking, drinking, substance abuse, risky behaviors like driving too fast. We also found that boys media reinforces the man box by showing boys and men as aggressors. So of all of the violent acts that are depicted in boys media, we found that 2/3 of these acts are perpetrated by men, and especially men of color are cast in a stereotypical light. They're more likely to be shown expressing no other emotion except anger, which again reinforces negative stereotypes about men of color being unemotional and being aggressive and violent. On a positive note, we did find that women and girls are being positively represented in boys media. So not only are female characters showing up in a way that reflects their numbers in the broader society, when it comes to screen time and speaking time, they're also prominently featured. And they're also more likely to be featured as leaders in boys media. So when we ask the question about whether or not boys will watch stories about girls' lives and women's lives, the answer is yes. So they're being exposed to some very positive portrayals in that regard. Why does all of this matter so much during the pandemic? Well, we have 2 slides demonstrating how much Generation Z, our young people, ages 16 to 23, are being exposed to media. 38% during the pandemic have been tuning into online TV and streaming. And when you compare them to other generations, the rates have gone up tremendously during the pandemic. So Gen Z is 51% more likely to consume this content than they were pre-pandemic, which means that whatever media influence and images they were seeing prior to the pandemic, that influence is far more intense now. And I pass the baton back to Gary to talk about a survey of parents and their boys.
Thanks, Caroline. At the same time that we were looking at what boys are watching on TV, early in this year, we also carried out a survey together with our partners at Promundo to say, what do parents think about their sons? In this moment of so much change, and particularly even more now with COVID, asking parents, what do you think? What do you see happening to your sons, and what do you expect for your sons? So this is a national survey that we carried out in the US, and also discussions with boys and parents qualitatively as well. The next slide, please. What did we find? There's both good news and bad news. The good news is that parents are worried about their sons, which means we can do something about it, and that they do want to come to the table and say, how can I raise my son to be more connected, more caring, more empathetic? The bad news is there's still a lot of confusion, and parents are both part of the solution, but often, not always, they're also reinforcing some of these norms around the man box. When we asked parents what they saw was the most important lesson for their son, a lot of them wanting really valuable stuff. If you'll click back just 1 second for it there. Honesty, respect, being responsible, all good things. But if we look at this last one over here, around emotional health, around being able to express how you feel if you're not, if you're feeling vulnerable, if you need help, which we often and all do, and many of us need, particularly during COVID, we saw just how much parents were still stuck partly in the man box. Next one, please. And then if we asked, how much do you see that your son experiences pressure to be a certain way in the world, you see that there's a lot. And some, if you add those together, more than half really worried that their sons are being pushed toward a box that says, you gotta be athletic, you gotta be strong, you gotta fit in, don't show you're sweating, and be sure you act like a boy, not like a girl. There's still a lot of homophobia lingering out there that parents pass on because they worry about their sons fitting in. And finally, if you go to the last slide, we also saw this, that parents see that it's really tough for their sons to talk about emotions, whether showing they're insecure or embarrassed or lonely or scared, which all of us have those moments that we do feel, that if they're sad at times, and even to show about half said they even think their sons have trouble showing love. So what we're really trying to dig into with this work is to show boys in their messy complexity and to promote healthy versions of masculinity. So back to you, Caroline, to talk about what we want parents to do and the media.
Thanks, Gary. So we have some action tips for parents and then some content creator tips as well. The first big tip is to take advantage of the time that you have now home with your young people, right? Everyone has a lot of fear and uncertainty right now. So taking this time to really talk about openly about your own fears and acknowledging the particular challenges that boys might feel about being vulnerable, right? And the courage it takes to come forward. Also, in general, curating family media. So avoiding media that exposes your children to the man box. Although it's really difficult because it's all around us. And so when you see it, typical depictions of manhood that reinforce the man box, call it out. And also find media that provides very different and varied stories of men's lives and how they could be fully formed human beings in all of their complexity. And then, of course, modeling healthy behavior, again, especially during this pandemic, reinforce the idea that it's okay to ask for help. We all need help. We're all in uncharted territory right now. So modeling that for your sons, and taking mental health seriously and seeking help for problems as they come up. And then for content creators, pretty straightforward, avoid common stereotypes that reinforce rigid gender roles. Avoid gratuitous violence and associating it with men, especially men of color. Show men in all of their complexity and boys showing a full range of emotions. And then show boys who are asking for help, who are playing with girls, who are shown as having close relationships with their parents, with girls, doing household chores. And also we think it's very important to show a range of gender identities so that our young people don't grow up believing that the rigid gender binary is the only option for them. Thank you. And we're passing it over now to Madeline DeNono, the CEO of the Geena Davis Institute.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I just want to let all of you know that all of this data and the tips for content creators and for parents is available on our website now. So we just want to let you know that. The second thing I want to let you know, we wanted to say thank you for all of you that are sending in questions. If we don't have a chance to answer your question live, we have all made a commitment that we will answer your questions via email. So don't shy away. Please put your questions up and we will get back to you. So now I'm going to move into a panel discussion, and it is such a privilege for us to have these three leading male advocates. And so I am going to introduce first Justin Baldoni, actor, entrepreneur, and filmmaker. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining us today. Wade Davis, feminist, educator, and former NFL player, but I think all of these gentlemen would admit to being feminists. And Joshua Rush, actor and political activist. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're so honored to have you. How are you all doing?
Fantastic.
Good.
It's a beautiful day.
Doing really well.
I am going to throw to our Gen Zer, Joshua. You know, one of the things we talked about, you said, you know, representation can save lives. So I was hoping you could share with us the impact of your experience on Andy Mack, not only on yourself, but on the community and also on your fans.
Yeah, definitely. So hi, everyone. My name's Josh. I'm 18. I am definitely the closest in age to kind of everybody who has studied. I bought my first car yesterday. It was a very exciting milestone that I hit. Just want to drop that on everyone. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited. I don't have my license yet. I'm getting it this week, but you know, anyway. But I also, alongside being 18 and buying my first car, I got to play the first openly LGBTQ+ character on Disney Channel. My character's name was Cyrus Goodman, and in our season 2 opening, he came out as gay. It was a huge deal. It was a huge honor. We had all sorts of like crazy media coverage, and it was really cool. I was supported by Disney Channel in building out a really nuanced and really three-dimensional queer character on Disney Channel, which is something that I think surprises a lot of people sometimes. But along with the writers of the show and along with everybody at corporate at Disney, I had the opportunity to really develop, and to a certain extent, I developed alongside a really cool, really nuanced queer character. That is something that is so incredibly important, because we get to watch young people see this show, see this character, and in turn, see themselves represented in this character, right? And that's what representation is always supposed to be about. We say in media all the time, like, representation saves lives. I hear it talked about in writers' rooms. I hear it talked about in corporate spaces where queer characters are being debated and bringing on queer characters and working against the tokenization of queer characters and other minority characters. But it's really seriously true, because when people see themselves visibly in media, not as a punchline or a means to an end or as a tokenized character, they see themselves inside. And that is so incredibly, incredibly important. I can't stress it enough. And so when this character came out, when we started having these conversations about this story and this and everything kind of started here, the impact that I got from fans was crazy. Like, I still, like, just thinking about it, it kind of still blows my mind. It's been years now. There was like some level of interest on the show that kind of came from the announcement of having a queer character, but a lot of it came from these fans that we already had, who looked at this and saw we were really developing a character like this, who was not a stereotype, who was breaking down barriers, who was just being truly his own authentic self. And fans were inspired by that. And the number of times that I would just like open my Instagram DMs just on a random day and see somebody in there being like, wow, I felt inspired to come out to my parents because of you. That's crazy. That is wild to me, that that's even an opportunity or something that can possibly happen. So when people see themselves in media, when people see positive representation of men, of boys, of queer characters, of characters with disability, of youth, of color, they see themselves and they feel validated for who they are. It matters. And it matters in an incredibly personal way to me, because some people were inspired to come out because of my character, and I watched that happen and happen and happen. And after a couple months, I was like, well, I might as well come out myself. And so shortly after our show ended, I felt inspired by the people who were inspired by my character. And I said, well, their representation matters too. And them representing themselves and being their authentic selves in front of their families and in front of the world, that matters too. And I should do the same. So I came out as bisexual in August of last year. This is my first Pride Month out. And it matters. It matters. It shows people that they matter. It gives people an inherent value. And it teaches people, and especially young people in these incredibly formative years. There's something in this study where it's middle childhood. It's right where we need to be presenting positive versions of masculinity in young people. It's 8 to 11 years old, versions of masculinity, positive queer characters. That's when independence and social awareness, the desire to fit into your peers, they all kind of start to come into play. And then you wrestle with these things all through adolescence. And I know that because I'm still dealing with it. I'm still wrestling with it. But what an incredible opportunity we have as people in media and people with influence in this world to say, wow, let's be out, let's be proud, and let's be loud with who we are.
Thank you so much, Joshua. So just building on some of the things that Joshua said, Justin, I'm going to throw to you, because we talked about breaking barriers. We talked about authenticity, and you're our father of the group. And so, you know, as an actor and a filmmaker, you know, and an activist, you know, you're trying to teach your daughter and your son. You're also trying to help, you know, men and boys out there, you know, with your show. So can you talk a little bit about that, about what kind of stories are you trying to create? You've been challenging, you know, this idea of toxic masculinity. How does that play out with your family, and how is that playing out with the work that you're doing?
Well, first of all, hi, Madeline. Good to see you. Good to see you again. Josh, brother. Oh, man, I love you. Your spirit is so beautiful. Wade, good to see you again, man. Good to talk to you. You got a powerful group of people here, and I'm honored to be here. And thank you to Geena for starting such a beautiful organization. And Salma, I really appreciated your words. There's a lot of questions you just asked me, by the way, Madeline. There's a lot of stuff in there. And my as a father, my caffeine is still hitting, because, you know, my kids are about 7 feet away, and at any given point in time, they're gonna start banging on that door. So just I'm preparing everybody. Yeah, so look, as a father, I will tell you, I am learning. And I think the key here as a whole is that we will never, I think, arrive. And that's something that I believe is important in the message of masculinity, is that this work is going to happen until, you know, we take our last breaths. You know, I had the great honor of celebrating Father's Day with my dad on Sunday. Not a lot of people have dads, and not a lot of people my age have dads who are around still. And, you know, and I just finished I just finished my book on masculinity, which is going to be coming out next year. And for me, I realized, just like as I looked into the eyes of my father, as we're trying to figure out, like, together what it still means to be a dad, even though he's raised me and I'm 36 and I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, there's no manual. There's no book. There's no, this is what it means to be a father and this is what it means to be a man. Which is why I loved, and I wanted to jump in and join. Like, if you can't see it, you can't be it. This is exactly what it is. Men learn by modeling. So the importance for me as a father is trying to model the behavior that I hope that he can grow up and start to emulate. And that starts with vulnerability and showing emotions and being present. It starts with, I had a conversation with both my kids the other day, because I've been feeling a lot of dad guilt. I've been feeling a lot of like this guilt because I'm sitting in this room right here a lot of the day, because we're all working from home during a pandemic. And my son's banging on the door all the time because he misses his daddy. And I was fearful, that I am creating a situation where he's going to grow up feeling like his dad was always just out of reach and just, a few feet away, but not there. And I sat him down. He's 2 years old. And I tried to explain to him that the things I'm doing, while I know they're hard for him and they make him feel a lot of emotions, are also making me feel a lot of emotions, and emotions are good. And every night, as an example, I do this thing where I teach him that the strongest muscle in his body is his heart. And these are simple, very simple, like, 2-year-old versions that actually really are for me. And let's just be real. Like, all of this stuff are it's for us, because I, during the day, have to remember that the strongest muscle in my body is not my biceps, right? It's not my quads or my abs. It is my heart. It's my brain. And the longest journey we're ever going to go on as men is the journey from our head to our hearts. So if we can start to engage our children, and then eventually our kids that are Joshua's age that watch this show and that are 18, and then eventually the men that are our age, right? That the heart is the strongest muscle in your body. That the emotions, that the things you feel are there for our benefit. And if we keep them inside all day long, that's why they turn into rage, right? We wonder why, like, rage is the most expressed emotion for men in the world. It's because we never learned how to use our hearts, because the heart was the thing that made us vulnerable. And vulnerable is synonymous with weakness, and weakness is synonymous with feminism, and synonymous with being gay. And then the list goes on and on and on and on about the systemic issues of all of the reasons why we as men are so afraid to tap in to those parts of us that are really who we are. You like this idea of being weak, right? Like, that is the beginning of trying to figure out, like, why are we even associating that with being feminine? Where does that even come from? And we have to pull back and change our dialogue, our behaviors. And then it goes back to, what are we creating content around? And what are we putting into these boys and men's heads that women are seen as weak? And then I don't think we can even start to approach the conversation about masculinity until we can fix some of these issues, right? Which is the way that we are seeing the women in our lives. Not as like, and as earlier, like, not as the doctors and the lawyers and, like, the people in positions of power, right? Not as the strong, independent women that raise us. We're seeing them as weak and being taught that, and it's ingrained in us. So unless we start to change that, we can't even begin to address the conversation of, like, a man being, like, in touch with his emotions, because until we realize emotions make us strong, right, then we'll never fix that. So I'm going on and I digress. So what am I doing? I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out, because everywhere I look, it's like whack-a-mole. It's like we're in a lifeboat and there's 500 holes, and you fix one and then another one pops up. And what I can tell you is that the journey of a man right now trying to do this work is very similar to the journey that I believe all of us white people are needing to go on right now to become anti-racist. I can't believe how close they are, because I am realizing now as a man, especially a white straight man, and recognizing my privilege, first of all, as a man, and now having the cultural uprising and awakening that is so desperately needed, how similar it is for us. As a man, as an example, when I hear something that is homophobic or transphobic or sexist or something, that I have to stand up and say something. But now we need to do the exact same thing as white people. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, what a time, like, that we get a chance to like break our barriers, to get comfortable in the uncomfortable, but to dive into that cold plunge and figure out, like, how do we start to rip all this shit off and become the best people that we can possibly be. And that starts with just digging in there and asking questions like this. I don't think I answered one of your questions, Madeline, but I hope that something I said makes some kind of sense.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Justin. I'm actually going to pick up a thread on some of the things that you said. I'm going to go over to Wade Davis. So one of the things you said, Justin, is men and boys learn by modeling. They want to emulate. And Wade, who more than you can talk about how boys emulate and want to be you, want to be that strong football player, want to get into the NFL, and, that, gateway, of sports. And also, I was so touched. I was in tears when I watched your TED Talk on the Mask of Toughness. So, what's the takeaway? Because parents get their children into sports at a very, young age. And what have you learned from that? And what can we take away in terms of breaking down this mask of toughness?
Yeah, there's so much there. The biggest thing that I push parents to do is to ask your kid questions, right? Like, one of the biggest things that, when you talk to kids and when you talk to parents oftentimes like to tell instead of actually talking with. Like, what does it look like to actually talk with your child? Which means that you as a parent have to show up with a high level of curiosity and a high level of humility, and you've got to get rid of your actual shame, right? So when you as a parent, when your child asks you about sex, like, you've actually got to be honest about sex. When your child asks you why dad does the trash and mom does the dishes, you as a parent have to humble yourself and answer those questions with a great level of honesty and humility. But the thing that I think that I would love for folks to leave this session with is, like, when are we going to teach our kids to ask better questions, right? As a boy, right, you're taught so much that you don't ask, that you know everything, right? But how can you build yourself if you've never asked who I am as a person? So in the take-home reading, like, there were language like that parents said to be honest, be responsible, be hardworking. Ask your kid the question, what does it mean to be honest? What does it mean to be responsible? How do you define responsibility? How do you define hardworking? If we're always telling our kids who to be, right, then they will start to imitate, as James Baldwin says, an imitation. And we've got to really embody the work of Audre Lorde, who says, if I did not define myself for myself, I would be crushed in the imaginations of others and eaten alive. And what we're witnessing is that there are too many young men and young boys who don't question, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be black? All of these really hard questions, we've actually got to put those questions on our kids, because when kids learn to ask these types of questions, you learn more about yourself, right? Like, I used to think of the term as a gay man, right, that I used to come out. But I actually realized that I actually never came, was always present. But what I did was I invited the world in, because I had to question the language of coming out. The language of coming out never affirmed me, right? What it did was it put me in a proverbial closet as a wire hanger or some smelly shoes. So I would just implore you all to question your children more. And as a parent, question yourself, right? And start to model the idea that questioning allows kids to live in a world where they have actually become who they want to be, and instead of actually who they think that they should be, right? To question your kids and say like, why do you want six-pack abs? And don't ask your kids the question of why, because why is too big, it's everywhere. Ask your kids questions like what and how, because that gets to a certain level of specificity. And when you're really trying to understand who your kids are, you want to stay in a space of curiosity and teach your kids the courage to ask questions and to reinforce the power of questioning so that kids can really start to define themselves for themselves. Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you so much, Wade. So I'm going to pick up on a thread which Wade said, which is about asking better questions, the power of questions. And so Joshua, I'm going to go back over to you because that's what you did with your show, News in a Rush. In case anyone hasn't seen it, it's an awesome show. And so can you talk a little bit about why politics, why that show, and why you're so interested in kind of the nonfiction world, and also using that to engage and motivate, youth?
Definitely, yeah. The first thing I want to say is if we're going to talk about politics, right now, today is election day in New York. Polls are open right now. So, finish being here, but there's 311 people here. I'm guessing at least one of you is in New York and maybe hasn't voted yet. Please go vote. It's important, not even for you, but for me and for my generation as we continue to move forward. We need action now on the things that we are facing in this country desperately. So please, for the love of God, go vote, not for you, but for me. So that's my little soapbox. But Wade, I was like banging the table. I was so happy to hear you saying these things and quoting Audre Lorde. It's so important right now to be teaching kids to ask the right questions and teaching kids not only to ask the right questions, but to question what they're being shown and to question what they're learning. Right now, I think a lot of adults are kind of looking at what happened with Trump's rally in Tulsa. And I want to kind of use it as a case study because it is proof right there that young people are looking at what is happening in the world right now, and we're saying, that's not okay. We don't like that. We can't deal with that. So I started building the year before last, I started building a show that was going to use the platform that I was given by Andy Mack through the Disney Channel to build out something that was going to teach kids to ask the right questions. Because I'm a big believer that, like the name of this study indicates, if young people see it, if young people see asking the right questions, if young people see questioning authority, if young people see building out a better world for themselves, they will be it. Seeing queer role models lets queer kids be comfortable in themselves. Seeing people talk about politics like they deserve to be involved in it makes people want to get involved in it. And that's how we build out our next generation of leaders, of community leaders, of change makers. Having this show and having this platform informed me of this kind of opportunity that I had and that all of us on this Zoom call right now have to engage a youth generation into becoming advocates and into using social media for social change. So what was News in a Rush while I was still working on it? News in a Rush was once a week, I would get in front of a white wall, or while I was in Washington, DC, I would walk up in front of the Capitol building, and I was producer, director, writer, sometimes editor, but I'm not very good at that, but we can't all be perfect at everything, and host. And I would go up there and I would talk about an issue in politics or an issue in the news that we are facing right now that young people deserve to understand. Because at its core, I hear adults talk about, oh, wow, we need to get young people involved. Oh, we need to make sure that young people vote. Well, how are we supposed to make young people vote? How are we supposed to make young people get involved unless we're meeting them where they are? The news has got such a huge, colossal learning curve. It is hard to break it down. My fans on this show showed me how much of a need that there is to help kids break down the learning curve of the news. And right now, young people are having this crazy realization that putting padding on chains only makes them more comfortable, when what is actually necessary is to break them. Kids are making change. Kids are demanding that change are broken, and they're demanding that their leaders listen to them. So I have seen this. I have recognized it. I understand it. And here's what I'm doing now. I'm making it my life's work to break down the learning curve of the news and to build programming and political communication that inspires the next generation of change makers, of leaders in their communities, in this country, and in the world. And we can do it. We can all do it together, but I can't do this alone. We have to be partners in this. I want to get my peers and everybody younger than me involved. I want to build out content that helps Gen Z continue to make these huge strides. We know that there is a will. My generation needs help finding the way to create the change that we want to make. And I know that it's going to be great as we continue to build out things like this because of the feedback that I've already received. And I know that there's an opportunity to really grow this. There's an opportunity to make social change makers. So here's what I want to do. If you want to get involved in doing something like this with me, I have an agent. Reach out, please. I want partners in making the next generation that our country and our planet deserve. If he sees it, will he be it? Well, if my generation sees becoming a leader, sees the problems that they are facing and knows how to ask the right questions to change the world around them, then they'll be it. We can do it. It's going to take all of us. Also, please vote, please. That's it. That's my whole soapbox. Please vote, though.
Thank you so much, Joshua. So Wade, I know you have a hard out at 10, so I'm just going to throw back at you for a minute. And I want to build on something that Joshua said, which is partnership for social change and being change makers. And, clearly you have, lived that life, coming out as the first, NFL player, as part of the LGBTQ community, all of the advocacy and the consulting work that you've done, not only for the NFL and for others. And so I want to just give you this opportunity to talk about that impact and talk about anything else you want to share, with our audience in terms of takeaway.
Something I think about a lot, right, is not just how our media impacts the way that boys and girls think about themselves, but our education system, right? So if you think about every book that you read about history as a young person, men were the ones who built the world, right? And women were, I think the quote says is that anonymous was a woman in history, right? So like, how do we start to ensure that the books that we're giving our children from the time that we start reading to them complicate the narrative of who you can become, right? So are you reading books to your kids that feature a queer character? Are you reading books to your children that center women characters? Like, there's a reason that in some states in this country, they're trying to keep Hillary Clinton out of the history books, right? Like, that's not by accident, right? It's not by accident that most of the stories in this study says that men are centered as the creators or the innovators and women are an afterthought, right? So how do we as advocates really push hard to change our education system so that the books that our young people are growing up reading, right, that they see themselves as full human beings? Because one of the challenges is, right, is that if you're 13, 14, 15, and you've come to believe all of these things, not just about yourself, but about women, it's so hard to unlearn that. It's so very hard to unlearn that. And I'm a perfect example of that. Like, I was taught for so many years that being gay meant that I was less than, right? That femininity and masculinity were binaries and they were oppositional, right? So how do we actually understand that the root of homophobia is sexism? So that if we as LGBTQ folks do the work to fight against transphobia, homophobia, we also have to fight against the work of sexism and be an anti-sexist. Just like folks want to be anti-racist, you actually have to be anti-sexist. And if you're going to be anti-sexist, you get no credit going into tomorrow for the things that you may have done on this day, right? So I may be the most amazing gender equality advocate on Monday. I don't get a cookie. I don't get praise. I don't get anything because I am doing it to benefit me too. So if I could leave you all with anything, is that when you do the work to undo any system of oppression, you benefit too. So if you're a white person who is doing anti-racist work, white people benefit from a world that is free of racism. If you're doing the work of anti-sexism, men benefit from a world that is free of sexism. But the first role of any person who wants to be an ally is to interrogate how. So before you attempt to go do the work that benefits Black people, you got to understand, what does it mean that I identify as white? What does it mean that I have identified and existed in the world as a man, and I've never interrogated that? You know, so I would ask everyone to do the work of self-reflexivity, to really get to understand who you are and why have you shown up in the world for all of these years. Like, if you're interested in being an anti-sexist person now, the first question that you have to answer is, what happened in my life that I didn't do it before today? Like, you've got to answer some really hard questions about yourself and do the internal work before you can even attempt to do the external work, because the external work is really hard. It is really hard. And you've got to build a certain type of muscle and a certain type of callus to be able to walk through the fire that is the world that says you're not tall enough, you're not short enough, your abs aren't ripped enough, your muscles aren't big enough, your children don't look a certain type of way. The world will constantly tell you that you aren't enough. So what are the tools that you can walk around this world with to overcome that? And the last thing I want to leave the parents with is that I gave a lot of talks to high school and college kids, and I asked them two questions. I would say, raise your hand if a parent told you that you should love yourself. And every hand in the room went up. And then I said, keep your hand up if you've been taught how. And almost every hand went down. It's not enough to tell. You've actually got to show. You've actually got to show that actual work. Like, what does it look like to actually love oneself? So yes, thank you all, Madeline, and thank you, Geena, and everyone else for welcoming me.
Thank you so much, Wade. Thanks so much for joining us today. I know you've got to jump off, but really appreciate your time, and it has been so wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. So Justin, I'm gonna go back over to you, and I'm gonna pick up on some of the words that Wade said: interrogate, unlearn, undo. And you have done that dramatically, you know, as an actor, as a filmmaker, and building an incredibly powerful platform for social change. And it's been through your Man Enough show. You won a television honor. You're directing. You're really putting yourself out there. So for those of us who may not be as familiar as how you are putting your money where your mouth is and using your platform for social change, can you talk a little bit about that and the impact that it's had on you personally and also on your audience?
Yeah. First of all, I just got to go back to like these two panelists, because, you know, I've known Wade for years, and he's just such an inspirational guy. He just left. So, but Josh, I'm so excited for you, man. I'm so excited for you, and I want to help you. So, look, as Wade said, like, the idea of interrogating is really important. You know, the work starts in the mirror. It starts here, right? We live in this kind of culture, this society where we try to change our world before we change ourselves. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see so many, you see so many woke people kind of falling from their pedestals. I don't believe in pedestals. I think it's all a bunch of bullshit, excuse my language. I think we are all trying to figure this out together. None of us are experts. Doesn't matter how many people or books we can quote, or how many TED Talks we give. We're all, at the end of the day, going home and trying to figure out how to do this. So the interrogation is huge. You know, for me, I did my TED Talk just at the time that Weinstein was coming out, and Ms. Brooks' movement, the Me Too movement, was coming back. And it was very scary because I didn't know anything. And I was just going through the process over the last 5 years before that of interrogating myself to figure out why, what do I believe? Why am I inherently sexist? What are my unconscious biases? What are the reasons why I do at first want my wife to do the dishes, right? What are these things? Because I was raised as I'm a dude. I'm an athlete. I was It's like, you know, put me on a soccer field or in the gym with any guy and we'll go toe to toe. And that's just the way I was raised. But at the same time, that means I am benefiting the most from my white athletic male privilege. And I look the way that I do. I'm built the way that I am. And I was starting to see that. I was starting to brush up against all of the things that I was raised with. In the same way, the same thing we're doing right now about what are the parts of me that are racist without even realizing it because of the system that I was brought up in. And what it came down to for me was I realized that it was never modeled. I can't think of one celebrity man from the time that I was growing up that I looked up to, that I followed, that I watched on the basketball court or the football field, that lived a life that modeled healthy masculinity, right? Because the guys I looked up to growing up, the Van Dammes of the Jean-Claude Van Dammes, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, the Stallones, the Bruce Willises, these were like, you know, these were action heroes. You know, these are the guys that I wanted to look like. And I always thought that if I looked like them, then I would have their benefits, right? So again, Wade said, why do we want a six-pack, right? We should be asking, what about a six-pack will give me self-worth, right? What about biceps, right? What about, a big penis? What are all the things that we never talk about that will make us feel more like men? And so I realized I never saw these conversations happening. I never saw a man willing to talk about things. My dad never had the uncomfortable conversations with me, even though he was extremely progressive with emotional intelligence. So I set out to have uncomfortable conversations is really what I did, and tried to use the privilege I had that I was, I'm playing a sex symbol on a CW show that takes a shirt off every week, and then trying to find a way to balance that and use that as a way in, kind of as a Trojan horse. And I started a show called Man Enough, as we talked about. And the whole idea was to have uncomfortable conversations about what it means to be a man, so that we can model it, so that Joshua's generation can actually have some guys, some dudes that are a little bit older than he is to say, oh, and he can look to that. And so then he can become better than that. And then he's going to do the same thing. And then when these kids are coming up that are looking at Joshua, they're going to be even more advanced than he is. And so what we're doing right now is, I started a studio called Wayfair Studios, where we now finally have the power to finance, I have a wonderful partner, and we are financing movies and television shows and digital series that will actually challenge the status quo and help us model the content that we just never have had. Because there's, in our business, a business that is built around financial models, this idea of creating content that is good for the soul, that is good for the heart, that is good educationally, that actually makes a difference, has never been seen as, again, the word like synonymous, has never been synonymous with financial success. So therefore, our entire business has been built around what emulates financial success and what will make money, right? Which is why you look at the movie theaters and you only, and the titles that are coming out, and they're just sequels of sequels of sequels of remakes of remakes of remakes. There's nothing new, because the new things are risky, because the new things are vulnerable. So for us, we believe that what comes from the heart hits the heart. If you can create projects and shows that create change, that inspire people, then those will have the power of word of mouth, and that will bring financial success. We're reinventing the model. So Man Enough, as an example, this year, we were supposed to be shooting season 2 right now. We partnered with Procter & Gamble. And we are shooting season 1.5 now via Zoom. Josh, we got to have you on, buddy. We'd love to have you on the show. But again, finding guys like Josh, awesome. Wade, building content around them, the men that are doing this work, figuring out, what are we needing? What are we missing in television? And then reverse engineering it, going backwards and saying, well, there's a billion stories that exist of men that have done incredible things, of women that have been in the shadows for all of these years. How do we reimagine telling these stories and making these movies? And, as an example from My Last Days, my show about individuals who are dying of terminal illnesses, but living amazing lives, that have inspired me to go on and make movies like 5 Feet Apart and Clouds, which is about to come out on Disney, right? These are stories about people that are going through tremendous adversity and choosing a positive, that are choosing love or choosing hope. And Clouds, which is the movie that's coming out in in October. It's essentially it's a masculine journey of a 17-year-old boy who had cancer, who had so much in him and wrote a song called Clouds before he passed away, and the week he died, it hit #1 on iTunes. But the journey is about masculinity. It's about how he chooses to deal with his pain and with his cancer. It's how he chooses to love. It's how he treats the people that are around him. These are not things that we oftentimes see, especially for young people. And that's what's important. So honestly, again, I'm going to go back to no expert, figuring it out. I'm seeing what's wrong in the world and trying to figure out what I can do with my position of privilege to like put a small dent in it. And also really believing that education, as we've been talking about, is the key. We must be educating. And then, by the way, what you guys have done to the Geena Davis Institute here with all of this data, this is invaluable. Giving this information to creators, giving this information to TV writers and showrunners and filmmakers, and saying, here are the things that you can write about. These are the things that are happening in the world right now that nobody is talking about. And you can just go step by step, do an episode on this, make a movie about this, find a way to integrate that. That's how we create change in our business. And I'm just so grateful to be included and a part of the conversation. And I'm going to start talking now. Stop talking now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Justin. We're so thrilled to be partners with you. And we will all tune in when Joshua is on the next episode of Man Enough. And I have a feeling there's going to be some scheming going on. So, you know, there's a few things that Justin talked about, which really builds back into, and I'm going to bring Gary Barker with Promundo back. And also joining us is Celine Bonner, who's the executive director of the Kering Foundation. And when it comes to self-worth and reimagining boyhood, it's the perfect segue. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Gary and Celine.
Thank you, Madeline. It's been a really wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much to our panelists. And thank you, Geena and Salma. So we've looked at the importance of having a more inclusive representation of masculinity in the media. And as Gary and Caroline highlighted, everyday boys encounter this type of messages about what it means to act like a boy. And often these messages are harmful for themselves and of course for the people around them. So these messages encourage boys to close themselves off emotionally, and it limits their relationships and can even sometimes lead to violence or to sexist attitudes. These restrictive ideas about boyhood are reproduced generation to generation in schools, in families, in athletic, and in media. So with Promundo, we want to break this pattern. As you know, worldwide rates of violence against women and girls or other kind of gender-based violence are incredibly high, and even more in times of COVID. So to put an end to this violence, which is the mission of the Kering Foundation, we are launching this Global Boyhood Initiative with Promundo, the expert organization in engaging men and boys. And with the Boyhood Initiative, we want to guide boys to share emotions in healthy ways, to accept and connect with others, to break free from stereotypes, and to stand up and speak out against all forms of inequality and discrimination. We really believe that boys will benefit, as our panelists said, from this guidance from the adults in their lives, and will be able to be themselves, their wonderful, complex, healthy, and emotional selves. Gary, I'll hand the floor to you now.
Thanks, Celine. I think, Jasmine, you probably have a slide for us to talk about what the Global Boyhood Initiative is about. As Celine said, we're thrilled to be putting into the world a space to have a conversation about this. How do we talk about achieving the healthy masculinity that we're so after, but starting younger? This targets boys ages 4 to 13. We think a lot of the conversation to call men out must continue, but we need to take this earlier and younger so that we call boys into this opportunity to be our full-hearted, connected, authentic selves. We look at this as it's not boys' problem to fix. the patriarchy and racism and sexism that boys are born into is something that we as adults have to take our role in helping boys break free from. And so that means we're looking to talk to teachers and to parents and to coaches and those of you who work in media content producers. We want to talk to policymakers who some are allies, but who too often continue to implement policies that demonize some boys, particularly boys of color. We continue to see the effects of that. So this is what the initiative is about. We're building it as you speak. You'll look on the site there and you'll see that there's lots of pieces still to be built. We want to do this as a collective. We don't think this is any single organization or organizations who can do it. We are thrilled that the kickoff team for this is the Kering Foundation, Promundo, and Plan International. Geena Davis Institute, of course, a partner in this, but really, really building on some fantastic work that's out there. The next slide, please. And of course, the question, how can you be involved in this? I think we got one more slide there. Yep. There's where to text us, send us your ideas, send us your email so you can stay in touch. We are very much open to building this together. We want comments from boys and fathers and everybody who is about making boyhood. And I want to say finally, this is not decentering the conversation of all that we have to do to empower our daughters and to build a safe world for girls and women. This is together with, not instead of. And I also want to do a shout out. A lot of the participants who have been watching today are part of great NGO work and other work that's happening around the world. I would like to call your attention to a platform called Men Engage, menengage.org, a global platform for NGOs who are doing this work around the world. And of course, there's lots of great partners that we learn from in the US who are doing this work. A Call to Men, Futures Without Violence Representation Project, Men Can Stop Rape, Mentors in Violence Prevention, and many others who are doing great work and inspire us all the time. So that's to say we're in this together. Text us, give us ideas, connect us. We're just inspired and shamed by 3 really thoughtful men who are putting their voice out there on this topic. Join us in this call. Thanks again to the folks at Kering and to Geena Davis Institute. Back to you, Madeline.
So we're going to bring back Salma Hayek-Pinot, who's going to have some closing words. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go to Q&A, but as we said, we all committed to answer your questions. So make sure you put your questions and we will send you an email. So welcome back, Salma.
We're not doing this instead of all the work in empowering women. We actually think this is one very important part of our work empowering women, because we need to do the change together. If men redefine also their relationship with women, they redefine their relationship with life itself, because they got life through a woman. If you don't respect women, how can you respect life? And a lot of the violence comes from here. And when we are talking about what can we say to this new generation of kids, and sometimes it can be very confusing, yes, for the parents, and you know, I mean, first of all, and I don't want to go on a side note because I love so much our panelists and everything they say that I could spend another half an hour just talking about them. But what can we say to them when we really don't know? Because we don't. What we can say is we can let them know that they are a part of a new generation of hope that has many challenges. Amongst them, one job: to welcome diversity as a normality, to welcome diversity. But when we talk about diversity, diversity of gender, ethnic diversity, but also diversity of women and diversity of men. And I will share with you what I think means diversity. For me, diversity, it's usually when people hear diversity, we think about groups of people that need to be included. For me, diversity is the celebration of individuality. Like Justin said, if you go to the heart, The hearts have no gender, have no ethnicity probably, some genes in there. But the hearts are all different also. If you celebrate your own individuality and respect the individuality of others, not just as a group of people, as a group of color, as a group of people that identify themselves sexually, but as each one of the individuals. See diversity as individuality, the respect of the individual. It's extremely important so we can start asking the really interesting questions. As long as we try to fit in boxes, even if it's the box of the anti-box, we're gonna continue to repeat patterns. And we're not going to explore our hearts and our minds deep enough to find the interesting questions that can really change us as a species. The only way we can evolve is finding the new questions. And for me, that's why this generation, including the ones that have to guide them, or including ourselves, maybe I become that new generation. Why not? A new me that steps out of the boxes, respects everyone exactly as they are, and their process, which is ongoing process of rediscovering and evolving who they are. Respect for all of them. We can learn from everyone. Look inside yourself and let's come together with the interesting questions.
Thank you so much, Salma. And building on what Salma said and closing, it's only together that we can respect one another, we can ask the questions, and we can explore a new way to move together. So I just wanted to thank all of you who have stayed with us and all of your contributions. I want to thank all of our panelists. And I just want to let you know that, again, we will answer your questions via email. We have recorded this session. So for our members and our partners, you will receive a video recording of this session so you can rewatch it. And also for all of you who are hungry to dive in and learn more, all of this information, all of the research, the Boyhood Campaign, everything will be on our website and our respective websites. We hope you'll get involved. And again, thank you so much. And again, thank you so much, Salma, for your
thank you, Josh, Geena. My God, and Josh, really, that was so inspiring. And Wade, who's not longer here, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.